Coming up on TrueNAS Tech Talk, we're leaning into some controversy again, and we're responding to your comments and questions about the recent build script changes in the TrueNAS GitHub. We're going to talk about the Community Edition and the Enterprise versions, walking the development lines between the two, and how features are integrated into both lines of the TrueNAS software. Stick around. Just a quick note on some upcoming scheduling and programming here for TrueNAS Tech Talk. Kris and I are both going to be at the National Association of Broadcasters show in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. That's happening April 19th to the 22nd. Come by booth N1111 to say hi. We'd love to meet you there. So go ahead and stop by if you're going to be in the area.
That's going to be great. Looking forward to seeing you. And then related to that, no show next week. I'm going to be traveling. I'll actually be out at NVIDIA's GTC conference for part of next week. I hear it's going to be busy, so good luck. If you're there, maybe we'll run into each other, say hi, but we'll see you again the week after. Welcome to this week's episode. We got an exciting one ahead. We're going to lean into some controversy and just tackle some issues head on. But before we do, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, do all the usual YouTube-y things. Otherwise, we might have to do something crazy and cruel and rebase on Open Solaris, and you'll all have to learn that. And good luck with your hardware support now.
Yeah, I was going to say that might be a bit of a challenge. That's mean. That's mean. I used Open Solaris based ZFS systems in the past. That's just cruel.
I mean, they had some good stuff going for them back in the day. But yeah,
they did. I'll admit that.
Since gone down.
I still say Comstar was an excellent SCSI and FC target. I really liked that one.
I don't know if I've ever talked about my history here, but I cut my teeth on some of the early BSD days, but then I did a long stint in Scope and Server 5. That was my bread and butter for quite some time. Unixware was just a beautiful disaster. That was a fun experience. But Open Server 5, hey, you know what? Once you got it set up, it did run. It was rock solid.
Absolutely.
Heaven forbid you wanted to add a new tape device to it and had to recompile the kernel every time. So imagine doing that on tech support. I was doing phone support back in those days. 3 a.m., you got a non-technical person on the other end. They're trying to reset up their SCO box. And you're like, and we're going to compile a kernel now. It's like, oh my God.
Yep. See you in a few hours.
I don't mess those days.
All righty. Well, let's dive right into this one, Kris. We said we're going to talk about it, so let's jump in and address this right now. So there was discussion about the build scripts and TrueNAS sort of going internal. There was an awful lot of kerfuffle up on our forums and Reddit and the general community at large. So let's just go right into this. Let's talk about it, Kris.
Hey, you know what? We lean into the controversy here, but no, this is a good chance to go ahead and talk about it. Plus, there's been a lot of good follow-up questions people have asked, so we'll dive into that too and just give them a little more time and attention here and answer hopefully a little more thoroughly. But first of all, I'll just go ahead and give you some of the reasoning and what the statement was that I put out on our forum. So if you're a Reddit user, you don't go to our forums, you should probably check out there because that's where I try and lean into more of the official communication. Reddit's a lot more free form and the Wild West, so it's a little harder to follow along. But at the end of the day, the build scripts, yes, we are taking those internal. They're actually preparing to undergo a major refactor, but that's not really why we did it. Why we did it is we have actually a growing problem we've been seeing, especially after our transition to Linux and kind of the bar to entry has been lowered, of, let's say, not so good actors who are forking TrueNAS and then selling closed source commercial derivatives under their own brand. In some cases, we've seen ignoring the GPL and other licensing obligations too, which is not so great, right?
Yeah.
No attribution, no contribution back to the project, no support to you, the community, or to us, the engineering teams that are putting into all this effort into something they're basically turning around and slapping on their own hardware and reselling. That's not great. That's not great at all. And that's really a slap in the face, not only to you as the loyal TrueNAS community, but to the engineers who work so hard to make this awesome software available for you. So, unfortunately, a lot of these things happen in regions where there's no legal recourse. So there's no real way I can go put a stop to it, or we can really send the cease and desist and say, hey, do better. So to address this challenge, we had already made some decisions a while back to take the build scripts internal. But the timing of it was, and maybe you don't know this, but we start our development cycles very early. So we're getting ready. We just branched off for 26, which means we're now opening the floodgate to go start working on stuff for TrueNAS 27, way into next year, way far out. But we're going to be doing a refactor of the build scripts with all that as a result of switching to secure boot. And we're going to change around all of we're even putting a new build infrastructure here, all that good stuff. So it's going to necessitate a lot of change there. And that just made it the natural time to do this. And so again, this is sometimes where we get caught a little bit off guard because we're already working on stuff well down the road, a year out plus in a lot of cases before you guys ever see a single build or bit or feature. But because we do a lot of this in the open, you're seeing some of the consequences or the actions of this now in real time, as opposed to, say, at a normal closed source company where you wouldn't even find out about any changes they made until the product actually shipped and you got the release notes, if you even got it in the release notes, right? So a little different. We do things a lot more open and transparently that way, which is fine. Pros and cons on both sides.
Exactly. Kind of a double-edged sword there. We don't put our entire business roadmap out in the public, but people can infer a lot of it. And like you said, some of the prerequisites of those decisions of the secure boot requirements and about protecting the interests of, like you said, not just TrueNAS the business, but TrueNAS the community against these, proprietary closed source forks that basically said, hey, let's take their code, do a find and replace for TrueNAS. And amusingly enough, some of them, they didn't exactly do it exhaustively.
They did do a good job.
And we can still see, hey, there's TrueNAS somewhere in their interface or in a command line module or something like that. We can basically you lift that paper thin veneer and you say, this guy, you've just reskinned TrueNAS and now you're selling it and you've branded it as the product of your own work, which just it's not fair.
Which, again, with GPL licensed code, you're welcome to do that. Go take the components, fork it, do what you want. Just comply with the terms and do all the right things. And it doesn't hurt if you want to contribute a little stuff back if you do make fixes and improvements. But yeah, it's tough when, especially, they're not necessarily legally obligated to adhere to some of the license terms that we and the rest of the world have to handle. But one of the things we do want to mention, because we saw a lot of the knee-jerk reaction, right? Immediately everyone gets up in arms. Oh my God, they're not open source. They're not this, they're not that. Well, no, we haven't taken any of the, you got to understand, these are build scripts. These are not the actual code you run on your TrueNAS. So all the same open source, GPL v3 things, the middleware, the web UI, the components, the tools, those are all still up. We haven't taken any of those internal. We don't intend to. That's a very different thing. These are basically the assembly instructions. And somebody said, well, couldn't you just go build them again? Yeah, you could. Somebody probably could go implement their own. It's kind of the analogy of, well, do you lock your house at night? Or do you just assume, well, somebody can break a window, so there's no point in locking my doors. I'll just leave it open. Well, do I have to make it easy for all these guys? No.
Yeah.
And also, frankly, it's a pain in the butt for us to maintain if we're going to go do this. And especially now with how we're doing our build infrastructure, where there's a lot of things pulling from internal builders that I'm not necessarily exposing outside of the firewall here. So yeah, made sense from our perspective to go ahead and make this change now.
Exactly. So let's we've talked about what this does sort of mean for us. Why don't we lean into the side of people sort of, again, you talk about that knee jerk, that immediate reaction of, oh God, it's closing off or locking it down. What else does this change specifically not mean here, Kris? We're not closing our source.
It doesn't mean, we're not paywalling, especially existing free features, period. In other words, if you have any features you're using and loving in your TrueNAS today, there's not going to be the day where you get an update and all of a sudden your replication goes away, or the ability to expand your pool, or any of the features you use and rely on today. If it's in the free side, it stays on the free side. Period. End of story.
Yeah.
That's not how we do things. I'm not a big fan of rug pools. I've lived through several of those elsewhere through other products I've used. It's not fun. I wouldn't want to do that to you because I hate it being done to me. So all that said, there's a little nuance there. And some people have asked good questions. Well, do you have things that are paywalled or not free? Yeah, we have forever. I mean, it's called TrueNAS Enterprise. We've always had some proprietary features because we're building an enterprise appliance. And maybe not everyone understands the nuance of this, but that's how you make money and pay engineers. I hope most folks appreciate and understand that 99% plus of all the code and all the work that goes into shipping TrueNAS, so you can hit the download button and grab an ISO or grab an update file, happens because of really talented paid engineers who have mortgages and families to take care of, just like everyone else. We all work for a living. So it's not community in that sense where there's an actual open source consortium of folks contributing features. I actually had to go back and look. I couldn't find a single feature, or what I would consider a major feature, Kris, that was kind of a community contribution in that sense. At the end of the day, they've all been developed internally. Now, again, we do get occasional patches and contributions from the community, and we love that, and we want to continue to see that, especially on the apps catalog. That is the one area people tend to be pretty active, which is awesome and great. But looking at the build scripts, I had to go hunting through the history. I think it was on page 5 back in early 2024 where somebody sent a small fix in. The last time somebody who was not an IX employee sent a fix into that repo. And it was, way buried in the history. So it's not exactly a hotbed of like collaboration happening, especially in those scripts. So again, real world impact to you, very little to none to nil, unless you were somebody building from source, which again, just about everybody on the thread commenting, I'm sure, are not those folks. There might be a handful of you, but some people have different things they enjoy doing, and that's fine.
Exactly. Well, let's look at some of the additional questions that sort of came up as a result of this. One of the big ones that popped up all the time was saying, this takes away our ability to compile ourselves to validate that all these builds being downloaded are genuine. So, I want to take the source and build the ISO completely from it, and I want to check the SHA hash against the one that's publicly on your website to make sure it's 100% identical.
Yeah.
So
that's an interesting question. I'm glad somebody brought that up because I never would have thought to pre-answer that in an announcement in advance because I already know that's false. That's been a false security blanket since day one of FreeNAS and TrueNAS. And why do I say that? Well, you've never had the ability to go run a build and get the same checksums and ISO and sizes out of the other end. We don't even have the ability to do that internally. Why? Well, we don't have deterministic builds. That's not a thing. That's we'd have to go do that for every single component, every single bit of the OS we assemble, every single package. So if we go do 2 builds basically back to back, guess what? You get different checksums and different times and sizes and all that good stuff. So somebody asked, well, then how do I know the build is genuine? I was like, well, you have to trust your vendor. At some point, you have to trust that the vendor is doing a build and you trust what they're putting out as an artifact for you to download and install. That's what we do here. It's what we've been doing here, again, going on 20 years. So again, it's a little bit of, it was a false security blanket. I hadn't anticipated so many folks having that false security blanket. It just shows me how few people have actually done that because this is the first I had heard of somebody saying, oh, well, that's how you could go validate it. And I was like, well, clearly nobody's ever done that because they would have noticed it don't work. So that was an interesting argument.
Yeah, they would have noticed like, hey, these don't match right away, and that's somebody would have raised that question to say, hey, how? And I built it twice in a row and they were different. What's going on? And like you said, Kris, it's non-deterministic build system. That's what it is. So.
And there are some projects that have done a lot of hard work to go make deterministic build systems. And don't get me wrong, that's a cool thing. But holy crap, it is a lot of work, especially in a project as big as TrueNAS and all the different varieties and flavors of languages and everything we compile. It's a ton of work to get to that kind of glorious utopia. Not something we have the cycles to go put into it right now, especially for this very small benefit, is how we see it. But at the end of the day, we publish official images, we sign them, we seal them, we deliver them. Somebody had asked, well, how do I know you're not injecting things into the build? I was like, you could ask that of just about every project out there, right? So at some point, again, you have to trust your vendor. Feel free to audit the code. You should. I mean, especially on the deployed image, the Python especially is all open. It's not compiled things like C. You can go look at it and see what it's doing. You can also run network scans, see what kind of traffic's going in and out. And we do have people do that. I've seen people over the years since the FreeNAS days do that and always put in the interesting tickets like, why is it contacting this server on this port? And it's like, oh, well, that's how you pulled the jails catalog back in the day for plugins and stuff. And so we would get those questions from time to time. It's good. Keeps us honest. I don't have a problem with that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Part of that open development there. Well, speaking of the development piece, a lot of people, again, they said the P word, they said paywall a lot of times. They said, oh, does this mean, C is going to be frozen and we're not getting anything anymore? And we're going to, you're going to throw everything into the enterprise. How does that sort of tie into this philosophy? Like we've talked about, taking this enterprise storage focus when we're doing our feature additions. And I know, you had there's a nice pinned post over in our feature request category on the forums that it breaks it down pretty well. So what are we talking about here as far as like our feature decision process of saying what goes in the free side, what could potentially be an enterprise only feature on the paid side, and what about features that exist in the open, like underlying OpenZFS?
Sure. And that's a good question. It's actually a great question. There's a lot of nuance, but I'll do my best to see how well I can explain it. So let's start a little bit with the philosophy. And I'm glad you brought up the post I put in the forum. So we have a feature request section of the forums. People put in requests, they vote. It's great and all. We went ahead recently and put up a set of guidelines just to make sure you're putting in good feature requests that will get the proper consideration they deserve. Part of it goes back to our philosophy, especially with what we're doing with TrueNAS 26, where we're really looking at all features through an enterprise suitability lens. What do I mean by that? Well, historically, FreeNAS, especially back in the day, was grown very organically. There were a lot of features that would come in, especially very community-focused features that would go in, they would sit, they would churn for a while, they'd get refactored with the goal of eventually someday down the road, they would get hardened and turned into an enterprise feature. Especially in the early days where we had two distinct builds. We had a FreeNAS build and a TrueNAS build. That was back when we had the two names. Going back in the history now, I know not all of you guys know this. But at some point down the line, we switched to one unified build image, which is the right way to do things. It was a great decision, brought more stability and features to the community, but also meant we had one image to kind of test and beat up and improve quality on, all that good stuff. Well, we had to take a look at it just in the last recent year and say, okay, going forward, we also appreciate the community's had some valid complaints about there's been churn in some of the features, because we still had this model of we kind of bring features in, we let them bake, they soak, they change on the community side for a while first before we then go back and harden for enterprise. Well, the problem is when you do that, a lot of times you find things don't work as well for the enterprise as you want. We have a very different standard for when we consider enterprise worthy, right? And it means a lot of churn had to happen in the background. It caused some pain and angst for people in the community. I mean, we can look back at things like Incus. We can look back at the Kubernetes stuff. There's been different technology decisions where when we got into the enterprise hardening phase, we had to say, we're going to have to make some drastic changes here to get where we need to go to be able to support it, because it's very different when you actually are putting your name and reputation on the line and are signing SLAs and have contracts and you have to support it, right?
Exactly. And sometimes the decision that had to be made that was tough was we can't put this in enterprise. And that's what caused some of the things to be walked back. And some of the community users understandably were rather upset about this. And it's completely justified to say, hey, I just got used to this new way of doing things. And now you're saying I got to go back to the old ways. I liked the new way.
Yeah. No, it caused some churn. Yeah, no doubt. So again, we took a hard look at that over the last year and said, well, what can we do different? And what we decided is it's going to be an enterprise first mindset from here on out on how we bring new features to the product. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is when we embark upon any new feature quest, we want to go add a thing, add a functionality. We're scoping it, designing it, and building it to enterprise specifications on day one now. So it doesn't have to go through the kind of the long community soak cycle. Part of the change going to an annual cadence with TrueNAS 26 gives us that longer soak time with the 1 and 2 betas, with more time in between them, a longer RC cycle, more time for us to vet things here internally before it gets into your hands, and then more time for the community to also play with them, test it, and help find any edge cases, which tend to pop up because people have very wildly different environments, configurations, hardware, all the usual stuff, which is one of the awesome benefits of having such a big community. You guys have far more equipment in your test labs than we could ever hope to have in any one or multiple buildings. So that's kind of the philosophy change here. And again, you can go read the guidelines on the forums on how to put a feature request in, but it just means those will be the kind of features we're looking at. They have to have some enterprise relevance in a way we can make them harden for enterprise and also not harm enterprise functionality. That's another key thing. A lot of times folks ask for things in the home lab where it's like, now I'm going to be stuck having to have some flag somewhere that says hide that or disable that or don't expose that to the enterprise. And I have 2 code paths and it's just more work to test, which means you get a crummier experience. And it's just not great for anybody, especially since the burden's on us to maintain it forever, usually.
Yeah.
So that kind of gets back to the bigger question on how we decide which items to put on the free side versus the pay side of the product, Kris. So just wanted to give that background before we get into this discussion. So at the end of the day, I already mentioned, if it's already existing free and it's in the product today, then don't worry, keep updating. All your features stay and are retained and life is good. But you have to understand, since we're the ones shouldering the burden for all the development, all the testing, all the documentation, all the marketing work, you name it, the support team, all that good stuff, we have to evaluate every feature carefully and decide where it needs to sit. Some of these features have very expensive costs to ongoing maintenance, initial implementation time. It's not just write code once and ship it and YOLO. Like we have to, our reputation's at stake here. So we have to spend a lot of time polishing and hardening. A lot of features are never done because you're always extending them or improving them or adding more functionalities. Now, that said, there's a lot of open source things we do. For example, we contribute things back upstream. We try and be good citizens of open source the way we've always had. That's just been in our DNA as a company since day one, as IX Systems and now as TrueNAS. So, for example, we did a lot of work to bring the ZFS rewrite functionality to OpenZFS, which allows you to do kind of the soft tiering functionality between VDEVs, the special VDEV and the data VDEVs and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And then in the background, we're doing a whole nother set of work to go build management layers, UIs, and eventually in TrueNAS 27, extended even further to having policy engines so you can set your own custom policies for, when these files get to this level of hotness or coldness, take these actions, do these things, provide an audit trail, blah, 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 blah. Like all the things you have to do to enterprise harden it, right? Well, we're going to look at a feature like that and say, yes, we contributed some of the open source pieces back to the open source repos, and that's awesome. And then we're going to do, the other 90% of the work in some cases is going to be in our own code base and our own UIs. There's no upstream to contribute to. That's a kind of TrueNAS exclusive at that point, right? So we make a decision on how we're going to offer that. Is that going to be an enterprise feature? Is that going to be just a freebie we give out? And a lot of times we do a lot of things for free. You'll get 26 and go, wow, there's a lot of new improvements. For example, the Incus containerization engine. Yeah, we're hardening it for enterprise and all that, but that's fully open. There's nothing gated there. Could we have? Probably. It's definitely cost a lot of time and money and energy to go get it built.
Well, if you want to talk about features that had taken, years to bake and, we helped sponsor it, how about, RAID Z expansion? It's something that,
Sure.
Maybe is very occasionally seen in the enterprise side. Now we'll see it sometimes where somebody goes, hey, I had a small system. I had like a 5 wide Z1. Can I push it to a 6 wide Z1? I just need a little bit more space. And we'll say, yeah, that works. But for the most part, the demand on that came from the community side. So we looked at that and we said, well, let's put it, it's largely based, on OpenZFS. We're going to pay the contributions of, both financial and time-based and put it back upstream. There's also all of the other, things that we work on development of internally. Like we have Samba engineers, we have NFS, iSCSI, all of these other protocol engineers. They're contributing things upstream. So we don't just build OpenZFS exclusively here. It's not just people hacking away at that only. There's lots of other projects that benefit from the paid hard work of our engineers that we put back out into the open source community.
Yeah, we contribute back upstream. We've got some patches in the Linux kernel, and then we have some we have to maintain externally, like, for example, the NFS v4 ACL support. That's something that doesn't exist in upstream Linux. Why? Is it because we're stingy bastards? No. We'd actually love to contribute that upstream, but I don't think we would get it past the maintainers there. There's been some, you can go read, that's a whole different topic for a whole nother show, a whole nother day, but upstream Linux hasn't been very great about figuring out a strategy around NFS v4 ACLs. Plus, we wanted ours to be compatible with the BSD version, so you could do those seamless pool migrations when you rolled from core to scale, blah, blah, blah. So at the end of the day, that's one of those things where we maintain that forever, right? And it's all in the open source repos. You can go pull it from GitHub and stuff if you want it. But yeah, that's one I'd love to contribute, but don't really have a path to pushing that one into the kernel, I don't believe.
No, that's all right.
But at the end of the day, I guess all this to say, Kris, it's complicated, right? And I hate having to say that to folks, but it's the truth. We have to look at every feature on a case-by-case basis and just do the calculus on how much is this going to cost to not only build, maintain, troubleshoot, support in the field, all that, versus, what's the potential return on it? Is it really aimed at enterprise? Is it more aimed at home users? And so we do that pretty much with every feature. We go through our scoping sessions and make those decisions. And if anything, we've skewed very heavily towards the free side of the product, probably even more than we should have over the years, which is fine. It's awesome. And frankly, it's because most of us are also big TrueNAS fans and users at our homes. Like, yeah, I want my goodies at home too. And I take advantage of them. I'm happily running my LXC containers at home. So I get it. I do. But, again, full transparency here. We got nothing to hide. We're happy to lean into it and have an open and honest and frank discussion about this and other topics.
Well, so one of the other questions, and this was another one that I saw come out a lot, people saying, so what's going to change from the end user perspective? Am I losing access to updates? Am I losing access to download those ISOs? Are you guys going to make, a closed source Windows only exe installer? Are you going to cloud lock it? Is offline installation going away? I'm going to throw my Reddit post up on the screen where I threaten to fork the code myself if something like that ever happens. And I mean, I'm standing by that. Yeah.
This
We're
is
not doing
another
it.
example of a question I never would have thought of to pre-answer before we put this out in the wild, Chris, because it just seems so absurd to me. Lose access to your update files, not have an ISO to install. What are you talking about? Like, that's ridiculous. So the answer to your question is nothing changes. Your next update comes out, you hit the update button, you reboot. Hopefully everything comes back up. You're happy, your apps update, life is good, you move on. That's, again, unless you were by hand building things from source and compiling by hand, you wouldn't necessarily notice any difference, which I'm assuming, again, I'm guessing, but I think educated guess, that's most people here listening to the show.
Yeah. And to be clear, that doesn't change with, anything else. Even if we hadn't closed off the build system or, even though we have, there's no plans to change that. We have, offline customers, full dark sites that don't have any internet connectivity. We need that offline installation. That, the web guided install that was introduced as part of TrueNAS Connect, 100% optional. If you want to use the ISO and, mount it as a virtual image on a machine, you want to, connect it over, out of band networking, you want to burn it to a physical disk and stick it in a machine that, for some reason can run TrueNAS but doesn't want to boot off a USB, it's all going to continue to work. We have, there is zero intention to do anything silly like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, why would we cut our own foot off like that? That doesn't make sense. We have to support air-gapped installations, and ISOs are the best way to do that.
The pitchforks and torches that would come out just internally among our own engineering team, like you said, we like using this at home. We would be facing an internal riot if somebody said, guys, we're going to a cloud-enabled, download-only installer.
Yeah, no way.
We'd have a revolution on our hands.
Now, don't get me wrong. The Connect web install feature is pretty freaking sweet because it means I don't need to go get a keyboard and mouse lugged out from my home system if I don't have IPMI accessible, and I can just boot it and then go to the website, scan, there's my system, install it, and move on. It's about convenience, and it's about giving you more options that are hopefully easier for some folks to not have to go through the manual steps of firing up a terminal and getting the networking set up, like all that good stuff. You just click, and done. Exactly. That's all great. I love that kind of convenience, but by no means does that mean you get rid of ISOs.
Like I have
able to offline install.
I have a couple systems that either they have, they have a weird IPMI that demands a really old version of Java, or for some reason it just doesn't want to work for me, or it's based off like a workstation board that doesn't have that out-of-band management. That's how I tend to do my bare metals now. I'll make that USB, I'll stick it in the system, and I'll just walk back to my desk and be like, okay, I'm going to wait for it to show up in the dashboard. There it is, install, boom, done.
Yep. Again, easy and convenient. But again, you're not locked in. You don't have to use it. All the options are still there. So anyway, hopefully we've answered at least some of the more interesting and controversial, questions or concerns people had about it. I'm sure we'll get more comments in the YouTube section here, and we can go back and take a look at that for next week's episode and see if there's anything else we didn't think of we should address, which is good stuff. But again, full transparency, and we're happy to keep engaging with folks on the forums and continue the conversation. It's good. Hey, a little controversy now and then, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, on lighter news, on some other topics, one thing I wanted to point out is, speaking of the apps catalog, the Traefik app has gotten merged this last week. That's one of those ones for any of the folks who remember and were using that heavily on the Kubernetes side of the days, in the early days of Scale. That's been an app that's been long requested. We finally have a version of that available. So that, plus the new ability to use Docker networking and some other good stuff. It's nice to see some much needed and much requested features landing in the apps catalog. So go give that a whirl, play with it. And again, the apps catalog is a great place to get involved and get engaged if you are a developer and want to contribute, because especially you're not having to get into Python code and all that jazz. It's mostly a catalog. You're changing indexes or maybe some light scripting, but it's a great place to kind of cut your teeth on contributing. And frankly, it's how a lot of folks in the home lab extend the capabilities of their storage system in their TrueNAS. It's by and far away the most popular feature for the home labs. So again, go take a look at it, play with it. Would love to hear feedback, see if there's anything that needs further improvement there.
100%. Well, I think that probably wraps our show for today, Kris. We're just about coming up on the half-hour mark. It looks like it took us a little bit more time to dig into that, and it always kind of is how it goes when we come to controversial decisions and involved discussions and feedback from the community. But we do enjoy having this conversation. Like Kris said, we're pretty open about this. We're leaning into the controversy, and we want to hear your feedback and your thoughts on this. So as always, Thank you for tuning in. Please, again, do those usual YouTube things so that we don't have to make another critical change and start running everybody off of Solaris or IllumiOS or something. Please feel free to give us the feedback in the comments section over on our forums at forums.truenas.com, via email at t3@truenas.com. Again, do the usual YouTube things for us. Give us the like, the subscribe, share the channel with your technically inclined friends and family and anybody else who might be interested in hearing what's going on in the world of TrueNAS. And Kris and I will see you next time.